Hello, everyone, and welcome to Innovative's January Hot Topic. Today's topic of discussion is engagement basics. We have presenting to us Tatiana Bryant, who is Assistant Professor at Aldelphi University Library. There at Aldelphi, she holds the title of Outreach and Promotion Librarian. She designs and coordinates inclusive and community-engaged programs. She has over a decade of experience providing programming, reference, and project management. Previously at the University of Oregon and New York University, she holds an MS in Information and Library Science from Pratt Institute and an MPA in Public and Nonprofit Management and Policy from New York University. She researches gender identity and performance in librarianship, and her first book on partnerships between libraries and nonprofits is expected to be available later this year. Like all of the monthly topics that Innovative is bringing to you in our Beyond the ILS series, we are focusing on engagement basics to bring to you the key points that are in demand for this particular skill. We are hoping that you find our information helps you address your fears, face your fears, and addresses any questions that you might have about these topics within your library. It is our desire to ground you in the basic principles of the discipline and that you hopefully will learn from these experienced, feet-on-the-ground experts who are both practice the skills and teaches the skills to others. Next week in session 2, we'll move a little bit deeper in helping you outline a program of engagement success for your library. So let's put some faces on our voices. I'm Ann Callie, and I will serve as your Hot Topic moderator, and I'm joined today by my colleague Martha Rice-Sanders, who is going to be our chat moderator. Both Martha and I are senior consultants here at Innovative. Tatiana, you will meet in just a moment. So why are we here trying to have this discussion with you about engagement? We want the sessions to be just that, a discussion. Feel free to chat your thoughts and questions in the chat panel of your WebEx screen as they occur. Martha is there to gather those chats, and she will convey the information on to Tatiana as we go through today's session. Each of our hot topics on today's is no different, are presented to you in two parts. Today we're going to focus on the things that are good to know about the topic we're presenting, and Tatiana will share with you books and websites and additional resources that you may find useful once the session has concluded. We also want to talk about what it is we are actually talking about when we talk about engagement, and Tatiana will share with us some best practices in this area. We hope you join us next Tuesday when Tatiana will give us valuable information on setting a foundation for the future in your library. So before we begin, just to get some of the logistics out of the way, in your chat panel, we'd like for you to check in, if you would, by letting us know where you are logging in from today. And so you can do that in the chat panel. And when you use the chat panel, please be certain that you chat to all panelists so that Martha can convey your comments. So Martha, is anyone checking in? Yep.
While we give them a chance to start typing, I will say that I am logged in from Massachusetts near Providence, Rhode Island, and I'm happy to be with you all today. Here we go. We have someone from Arlington, Texas, where it's a lot warmer than here. Another from Philadelphia. Someone from British Columbia, and it's snowing there. Somebody else in Pennsylvania. Another person from Texas. A person from northern Wisconsin, and Frederick, Maryland. That's it so far.
Okay, cool. Okay. So welcome, everyone, from wherever you are. I'm checking in from Birmingham, Alabama. So again, before we turn the presentation over to Tatiana, just a little bit about why Innovative is involved in the Beyond the ILS series, and particularly why Hot Topics, and especially why engagement. So we do intend for this to be a conversation. Our Hot Topics are meant to be a conversation between you, the audience, and the three presenters that you have with us today. So we want you to learn the basics, and we're hoping that you'll take the opportunity presented throughout the presentation to pose questions, relate stories about your library's engagement, successes, and failures. Feel free to interact with the panels today, and in particular Tatiana, who is very engaging herself. We'll have several formal question periods throughout our 2 hours today, and we'll try to get those questions into our conversation as they go along. Additionally, chat your thoughts and questions as they occur to you throughout the presentation. Martha is monitoring the chat and Q&A panels and will introduce your questions into the session at the first opportunity presented her. I also want to emphasize again that today's conversation is part one of this two-part conversation on engagement. If you have not already signed up for part two next Tuesday, please take a minute to do so as soon as this session is over. And finally, at the end of the session, you will receive an email from us which will contain the links to today's recording, and it will also contain a link to register for next week's session. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation over to our presenter today, Ms. Tatiana Bryant.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'll introduce myself again briefly. I am the Outreach and Promotion Librarian at Aldelphi University, where I also serve as liaison to anthropology, African, Black, and Caribbean studies, as well as global studies. In my role, I promote the university libraries and archives and special collections by designing public programs and performing outreach to the campus and local community. Prior to Aldelphi University, I was a digital projects and engagement librarian at the University of Oregon, where I worked with special collections and the Digital Scholarship Center. I also have years of experience providing reference and instruction in the humanities and social sciences, and have worked in public, special, and school libraries previously. In addition to an MPA in Nonprofit Management from NYU, I hold a Master's in Library and Information Science from Pratt Institute, as well as a BA in History from Hampton University, one of the premier historically Black universities in the U.S. So in a nutshell, my primary responsibility as an outreach librarian is to effectively communicate the library's message, which is typically embodied by its mission, vision, and goals. Let's get started. As we all know, libraries face challenges stemming from cultural and technological change, as well as community perceptions of our relevance. We all know that the library offers more than just books and a place to study. We know that the library can be, and often does serve, as a vibrant center for the exchange of ideas, foundational education, and for the spark of innovation. But in order to communicate this message, it's important to have a strong engagement philosophy and program. Today I will highlight a range of engagement best practices, basics, and emerging trends in libraries with concrete examples that illustrate their successful execution. And hopefully I'll illuminate ways we can promote how truly central and essential libraries are to the communities we serve. To learn more and to stay up to date, I recommend reading the latest books on library marketing and museum participation and engagement. A few conferences that may be of interest are the annual Library Marketing Conference in Dallas, Texas, each November, as well as the upcoming Next Library Conference in Berlin and the Museum Next Conference in New York City, both in 2018. There are a few Facebook groups you may also like to join. One I find especially fruitful is Library Marketing and Outreach, also known as LMAO. You can also gain some inspiration by following specific hashtags like Finish Strong, which is a Finals Week programming hashtag on Twitter. You can also take time to visit the American Library Association's Programming Librarian website, and there are tons of great ideas, and you can contribute your own as well. I also recommend taking a look at the first issue of the new journal titled Marketing Librarians, which can be found at journal.marketinglibraries.org. By the way, that's not SponCon. I don't make money by promoting any of these resources. So, why should libraries perform engagement? Engagement is a critical part of the library's role as connector between users, whether they be students, researchers, faculty, etc., and the wider community. Libraries by default are welcoming, oriented towards learning, filled with quality information resources, free and present in many communities. I appreciate the distinction drawn by Jasper Visser, a museum professional, via his blog, The Museum of the Future, on the difference between engagement and outreach. He states that engagement is about designing programs and an online presence that turn occasional passersby into enthusiasts willing to go the extra mile for you. Engagement upgrades your existing audience and increases your reach. Engagement is done usually within the safety of the library's building, website, or social media presence. Outreach is in many ways the opposite of engagement. Outreach is about designing strategies that reach new users and connect them with your library. Outreach increases the number of people you can later engage. Outreach is usually done outside of the comfort zone of your library or online presence. One quick note, I want to acknowledge that most libraries already integrate engagement strategies as a matter of course. For example, libraries often enhance user access through responsive design. They make information about programs available online, and they improve the accessibility of library services and spaces. And users are engaged with the library when they repeatedly use these enhanced services. However, many libraries struggle with the fact that users and funders don't know the full breadth and depth of what we offer. Craig Gibson and Christopher Dixon, in the article, New Metrics for Academic Library Engagement, offer this definition of academic library engagement, which I choose to extend to all types of libraries and use to frame much of what I discuss in sessions 1 and 2. Quote, sustained strategic positioning of the academic library through new or redirected resources to create collaborative relationships with identified parties in order to advance institutional, community, and societal goals through a progression of activities ranging from one-time initiatives to longer-term projects to enduring partnerships to solve institutional and community-level problems or to support broad efforts to address long-range societal issues through a range of engaged activities to create new knowledge, new products and services through these strategic choices and to affect qualitatively different roles for academic libraries themselves through influential, reciprocal, and value-enhancing relationships of mutual benefit to libraries and the varied constituents and publics with whom they collaborate. End quote. I also find this definition shown on the current slide by Bettina Peacemaker and Jill Hines from the article Moving Users, Moving Results to be a useful frame of reference as well. Quote, engagement, while it may be based upon a variety of somewhat subjective elements, is ultimately a rational, calculated strategy with measurable outcomes. Part of this calculation must include the costs and risk, both financial and cultural, to achieve connections that will produce results. Peacemaker and Hines elaborate on this definition by stating that, quote, engaged users are those who pass a threshold from passive recipient of services to a proactive, involved partner who desires a role in shaping services they receive. So my first question that I want to pose now via chat is, does your library have an engagement philosophy? And if so, is it written down?
See, I'm looking at the chat, and It looks like everyone is saying no, they don't, or not yet. They're all basically saying this is not something they have done yet. That's it so far.
So I want to start by talking about best practices. Recognizing and adopting engagement best practices is a critical first step, and I want to highlight a few now. Feel free to note in the chat if you utilize or experiment with any of these best practices in your library now. The first best practice I'll mention is goal development, which will augment your engagement strategy so that it better aligns with your library's strategic plan, mission, vision, and values. Next, I recommend creating an engagement plan, which is essentially your project plan for your engagement strategy. It will help you identify key constituencies, project partners, resources, timelines, and proposed outcomes. Start by writing a one-page description of each current engagement strategy at your library, how it works, and its connection to each of your engagement goals. This plan will also help you orient new staff and volunteers. According to Closter Mansfield in the article, The Role of Stories in Library Marketing and Communications, quote, "The premise of an engagement plan is to prevent the proliferation of disconnected, piecemeal marketing activities undertaken merely for the sake of doing something, in the hope that our return on investment is worth the effort. We can stop hosting events just to get people in the door without thinking about what happens once the event is over, and we can begin to understand how all of our events, services, spaces, collections, and various attributes that we are working to promote are part of a cohesive whole." She goes on to state that everything we do involves connecting our speakers, our faculty, our students, or our audience to our collections, resources, and expertise. So this means when we plan our events, we should clearly identify our goals and also actively seek out co-sponsors, cultivating opportunities for collaboration while demonstrating our centrality and versatility to the campus. Next, I want to talk about strategic planning, which is of increasing importance in libraries. How does your engagement plan meet your library's strategic objectives and mission and vision? Engagement is most effective when tied to institutional goals. Libraries have the ability to be in our communities, to engage them, and offer specific targeted services. Our engagement with our communities can be the defining aspect of what a library is to any given community, specifically in the academic context. When crucial administrative decisions get made, for example, to open a new campus, build a new building, or add a new degree program, libraries and their services need to be represented. From the outset, engagement should be focused within the institutional goals of the university, which the library often mirrors through its own strategic planning goals, mission, and vision. Next, I recommend utilizing evidence-based decision-making when designing engagement. For example, seek input from focus groups. This means look for community leaders to help identify where users are and start a dialogue about what users need and want from the library. You can survey the campus for possible event themes, as well as create an advisory group to inform your programming and other efforts. This is also a place where I recommend you conduct a needs assessment. Adding student organizations as event partners is also important. One or two representatives adds a student perspective and increases the likelihood of obtaining student buy-in from their peers, as well as higher attendance through word-of-mouth advertising. Ideally, programming should address a community need that allows for space to acknowledge and address the cultural climate, a space where people who don't feel comfortable as experts on a topic are still welcome participants. I'll go into further detail about evidence-based design, forming advisory groups, and strategic programming next. But first I want to ask, what are your engagement goals?
Let's see, this is Martha again. I actually had a response from the earlier question. Someone did say, although they don't have a plan in place. They do have a marketing staff person. I just wanted to get that in there. Let's see. Someone else is commenting that they are moving toward a learning commons concept and are very interested in discovering what students and other stakeholders would like to see in that new setting. Another one is in the public library system, and they are now undergoing a change with their strategic planning, and their committees are in the process of putting together ideas on how to better serve their community. And they point out that you can't help a community if you don't know what their needs are. Let's see, one more. Actually, I think that's it. That's it.
So if your library doesn't have any specific engagement goals, I recommend If your library doesn't have any specific engagement goals, I recommend that you start by organizing one or more all-staff workshops. And please note that this work can be integrated into your strategic planning process, or it can remain independent of it. In a workshop, brainstorm 3 to 5 single-word, broad goals that make sense across a diverse organization. Apply your mission statement to the goals, and to make them both specific to your organization and applicable across it. Then write a one-page explanation of each goal and what high, average, and low execution of this goal would look like. All of your goals will be important, but some can be prioritized first. One goal I would add to every library engagement plan by default is sustainable. It's crucial to acknowledge that every engagement strategy must be manageable in terms of time, labor, and money. This requires staff to hold conversations about workload, scheduling, and financing for projects. I don't have a clear-cut solution because sustainability is specific to each library, but including sustainability as a goal encourages us to keep it in mind and occasionally at the forefront. Remember to talk about the goals and using them whenever you plan or review engagement activities. This includes brainstorming ideas for programmatic tie-ins to exhibitions, reviewing what was good and bad about a recent event, and evaluating potential collaborators for a project. And by the way, this strategy was adapted from the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. Now I want to talk about best practices for forming advisory groups. Advisory groups are a great way to get users engaged in library planning, programming, and decision-making. Groups can meet monthly, quarterly, or semesterly to provide input on how the library can better serve them. Consider the makeup of the group when you develop incentives for participation. Are you interested in attracting particular user groups, such as teens, immigrants, parents, or senior citizens, or marginalized or minoritized groups? Try offering childcare and subsidizing transportation. Their participation should be transactional. For example, offer to provide letters of recommendation for students who commit to a service term. Keep the meetings informal by not calling them meetings or workshops. Think about them as social gatherings with refreshments and small thank you gifts, like library swag, for participants. You may even want to choose a non-library location for some or all of the gatherings. Choose a neutral location that is familiar to participants, for example, a community center, as well as functional for the type of interaction that you're seeking. Allow time for socializing and networking interspersed between working sessions. Make sure that the events are organized and well facilitated so that when participants are working, their time is used efficiently. And vary the types of activities between small and large group discussions, and use multiple techniques for sharing ideas, including mixed groups and interspersed individual reflection and group dialogue. So next I want to ask, why should you try and understand and describe your community?
This is Martha. Well, someone has said that they think it's really important you can't to have programs that meet the needs of that community, and you can't do that unless you understand what those are. And then goes on to say that our perceptions may be off and things may have changed since we last checked in with the community to see what their needs are. That's it for now.
So now I want to talk about identifying barriers. So your users are absent from your library for a variety of legit reasons. Think about the barriers that exist. The vast majority of us are overscheduled between school and/or family or work obligations. Consider how difficult it might be to access public transportation. Ask how easy it is to find parking at your library during various points of the day. Is your library an inviting space? Whether or not users feel welcome is a mental barrier, whereas transportation and scheduling difficulties are logistical barriers, and both types often factor into users' capacity for engagement. Are your marketing materials in languages other than English? Use your needs assessment and informal conversations with users to identify barriers to engagement and formulate a plan to overcome these. Some common factors that intimidate and act as barriers to participation include technology, ranging from users' fear of tech to limited access to limited skills. Another is a method of invitation. Do you make an effort to invite specific community members and/or groups to your programs? Hours can be prohibitive and event times can run too short. Lack of unadvertised free childcare and lactation spaces can also act as a barrier. Lack of or under-advertised availability of food at an event can act as a barrier. Lack of public transportation options can be a significant barrier. Ask if your event is easy to get to. Do you advertise ways to get there on your marketing materials? Can your library sponsor or subsidize transportation in some manner? As for cost, do your marketing materials emphasize that there is no entrance fee or sliding scale fee to your library or event space? Also, homogeneous advertisements can also be intimidating. Are the people and symbols featured in your marketing materials diverse and inclusive? Location can sometimes be a barrier to access as well. How do you make the most of your library's location, be it geographic or its proximity to other buildings, organizations, or schools? And as a follow-up question, is a non-ideal location something to be overcome or something you've managed to take advantage of?
Let's see, here's Martha. Those are great questions. Let's see, we have one library who is said that they are centered across from an elementary school, and they have the opportunity to assist students with their software programs for their projects and reports. So that's where the location is a plus. This next library says that their location is a barrier. They have no program space, and they have to offer programs when the library is otherwise closed. They make the best of it, but they're exploring the idea of building a new library. And then they just said that they also rent out other spaces for the larger programs that they provide. That's what I see so far.
So as far as designing strategic engagement, before you design a program, ask yourself a series of questions that will help you identify the goals of the program, the strengths of your institution, and the perceived challenges, among other factors. A useful exercise for programming staff to conduct is called a community engagement evaluation, which is adapted from the Edmonton Public Library in Canada. Include the questions on the slide on a form and have staff answer them and then vote on whether to participate in or plan the engagement activity. You can consider strategic plan alignment as a factor as well. Include these questions in the evaluation. Who does this benefit? Is it sustainable? Can we support it? And consider labor, time, and money in that calculation. Does it have an impact? Does it build collaboration? Does it strengthen existing partnerships? Does it fit in with our comfort level, which I'm defining as the amount of spirit of experimentation and innovation at our library? If it doesn't, is it worth doing anyway? Does it celebrate and/or promote diversity, equity, and inclusion? Next, I want to talk about developing community partnerships. Involving users in program design as advisors and collaborators, and not just participants, produces attachment and buy-in. Collaboration breeds empowerment, and programs become more meaningful and relevant to users as a result. Community partnerships offer opportunities for libraries to expand their reach and recruitment efforts, pool resources, increase visibility, and improve the quality and quantity of programming. A community partnership is any collaborative effort between a library and another community organization, and it can be a one-time juncture or the basis for future joint projects. How do you identify community partners? I recommend undertaking a community asset mapping activity, ideally with a broad range of users, to identify high-priority potential community partners. Asset mapping involves identifying the assets your library has to offer and the assets of other organizations or resources in your community. After identifying these asset connections, contact those organizations to learn more about what they do. The opportunities generated by these partnerships are typically mutually beneficial. A quick way to engage new nonprofits especially is to offer library spaces free of charge for their use. Consider partnering with arts and cultural institutions, schools, parks, and recreation departments, government agencies, nonprofit youth services groups, zoos, especially since both libraries and many nonprofit organizations often face financial pressures. The book, New Roles for Small Museums, offers great advice on pushing past your comfort zone by moving beyond existing friends and stakeholders to establish new relationships with community groups and individuals, particularly those who are connected to networks of potential users and future target audiences. Some advice includes holding initial conversations with community leaders and groups to introduce your organization and explain your reasons for wanting to interact with them. Asking for the community's help to identify who should participate. You may need the intercession of respected community leaders to engage members of their organizations. For large community gatherings, rather than issuing an open invitation to the entire community, purposefully bring together people who can represent potential user groups and community interest. Include but look beyond existing members, for example, friends groups and representatives of educational institutions such as teachers who have participated in past or current programs. Invite business leaders, clergy, activity directors from local facilities, youth group leaders, and representatives of neighborhood associations, clubs and social organizations, government agencies, and social service organizations. Also include colleagues from other cultural organizations as well. I recommend developing a thoughtful selection process and a personal invitation process. Consider how your library contacts people. A general letter or email about a gathering may be misconstrued as a mass communication. In-person visits or phone calls followed up with reminders can also go a long way, depending on the community you're trying to attract to participate. When it comes to selling your potential partnership to the community organization, talk about it as an opportunity to share limited resources to create bigger and better programs for all participants. They will learn about the values and goals of the library and will likely pass that information to their clients. The organizations may have no idea what services the library can offer them. Community partnerships can be a great way to reach out to populations who may not come into contact with the library explicitly unless the library comes to them through another organization's network, marketing, or activities. Remember to disseminate the results of any community gatherings with all participants and ask for follow-up reflection and continued input if community members have additional thoughts and recommendations. As far as breaking the ice on campus, I really appreciate the simple tips for breaking the ice with potential campus partners that my former colleague at the University of Oregon, Barbara Jenkins, published in the article Campus Partnership, Collaborating in the Niche. First, she recommends that you learn what you don't know about your campus or library environment. This means identify which part of the campus organizational structure you don't know well and the roles they play. Browse the campus website, publications, and other communications. Call to introduce yourself and express interest in learning more about what campus units do, because personal connections are essential. Follow up with email. Ask for a short meeting to learn more and jointly consider how the library could support their work. Plan short meetings and mostly listen to how they think about their work and the students they serve. Be enthusiastic and look for common ground. Learn to speak their language and avoid library jargon. Look for opportunities such as changes in personnel, new staff, or different programmatic developments. Start small with one idea about collaboration or one thing to follow up on, realizing that sometimes collaboration doesn't work out the first time. Either it may be wrong or sometimes you're just not talking to the right person in that unit. Next question, how invested with engagement should library staff be? Should all staff be involved in engagement planning, coordination, or assessment? Why or why not?
Well, the first person to comment says there are two in their library, and they take turns designing the programs that are offered to various age groups. The next person says that all of library staff should be involved in this process through the engagement cycle. They can all be there to plan and advertise and assess the contact methods with patrons. And then a second person agrees that everyone should be involved. And a third person said they believe all staff should be involved as part of the engagement process. That's it.
So next I want to talk about what new skill sets we might need to develop or strengthen as engagement facilitators in our libraries. Shannon Abram of the Community Roundtable developed the Community Skills Framework as a strategic planning and professional development tool. Its purpose is to give community leaders a way to better identify and understand skill gaps and opportunities for creating stronger teams. A number of the skill sets she included are incredibly useful for library staff to have. If you have suggestions for how librarians can gain these skills, feel free to add them to the chat. Next, I want to talk about getting buy-in. Engagement requires a big leap of faith for some risk-averse organizations. Meaningful participation in engagement planning can help staff and stakeholders understand the reasons for change, build buy-in, and change attitudes and behaviors. This can help counteract resistance to change, which is largely a fear of losing control, power, competency, resources, or status. It must be clear to staff and stakeholders how the process of change will be implemented, particularly how it will affect existing roles, relationships, and responsibilities. The benefits of change must be expounded upon as well. Engagement opens doors, builds trust, connects your organization with new people and resources, builds awareness about your organization, and creates goodwill. What are your strategies for getting buy-in? Feel free to leave strategies in the chat.
Tatiana, I'm just going to jump in for a second. You asked where people learn skills, and we had one person say the campus offers continuing education opportunities that they use, and a second person said that they learned their skills initially as a volunteer. In terms of the question you just asked, They suggested that that the libraries could survey people who don't use the library. Another one comments, to get buy-in, they explain to select individuals what they're thinking of offering and get their comments as to the usefulness prior to offering it or not offering that event. Another library has a suggestion box that they look at each month and to try to incorporate those ideas with the programming at the branch she works in. And finally, we have someone who says they have the youth develop their own programs by going to school and posting pictures of themes and asking the youth to put stickers on the pictures that are of most interest to them. They've also used some surveys in the past, but the visual engagement seems to work better. That seems to be it for now.
So next I want to make some suggestions for implementing low-key programs based on library size. And some of these suggestions were adapted from Donna Cohen's article, Enhancing Civic Knowledge and Inspiring Political Engagement, the Role of Public Libraries in Civic Participation. These low-key programs should help you gain buy-in from staff and supervisors, as well as be of interest to users. If you're a very small library that cannot devote a lot of staff time or resources towards programs, try to host discussions based on articles and books about current events. Also try starting a human library. So the human library was designed to build a positive framework for conversations that can challenge stereotypes and prejudices through dialogue. It started in Denmark. It's been replicated in over 100 libraries all over the world, primarily public libraries. Essentially, users check out human books, so people with specific experiences that are willing to talk about those experiences with multiple people. And they have brief conversations with attendees. How many of you have ever heard of a human library or hosted one? Leave your comments in the chat. If you're a mid-sized library that can devote some staff time and resources towards programs, try to bring in a local community advocate to talk about what they do, but also to give general advocacy advice. If you're near a college or university, invite graduate students to speak about their interesting or topical theses or dissertation topics. Plan for limited but consistent programming, perhaps by rotating a new theme each year. If you're a large public library, it's key to make sure that you include engagement planning outlays in your annual budgets. So next I want to ask, how might we center the community in our planning? A few tangible ways I recommend include seeking involvement and not just input from users, as well as giving attribution and compensation for user contributions to our planning. Nathan Sentance of the blog Archival Decolonialist has a great point that I like to refer to. If your project or program is not driven by a community-requested desire, then it may be exploitative and only advancing your career. So I definitely like to keep that in mind as we talk about some of the future case studies that I'll discuss soon. Next, I want to ask, how might we design programs that empower people? Another engagement trend is the concept of library as connector, not just to resources, but to ideas and community. Many people are interested in working in their own communities to build their own communities. How does your library facilitate that? I recommend creating programs that empower our communities, especially in response to the toxic cultural climate, designing programs that celebrate inclusion and support students and others who feel marginalized, isolated, or ignored. These types of programs offer space for students to engage with the library as users, peers, and citizens. And they often attract co-sponsors like campus and external partners easily. Next, I'm going to discuss a few engagement activities I've coordinated in a case study format, which will delve deeper into this question and related ones moving forward. I'll give an overview of the program first and then add some of the nitty-gritty details afterwards. And if you'd like me to elaborate more on the behind-the-scenes planning process, let me know via the chat.
Not seeing anything yet.
Okay, so first I want to talk about You Must Never Look Away from This, which was an exhibition of artist books I co-curated in response to the 2016-2017 UO Common Reading Selection, Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. The Common Reading Program allows us to connect library programming to a wider year-long University of Oregon initiative. This exhibition featured companion programming, including a screening of archival footage of Black political activism on campus and in Eugene, Oregon during the 1960s and 70s, where the campus is located, as well as a free artist book creation workshop. We were able to get the Oregon Humanities Center to co-sponsor by agreeing to participate in a related lecture, by agreeing to promote a related lecture on our publicity materials, our PR materials. By using library materials, this time our artist book special collections, to expand on the themes in the Common Reading Book selection, we exposed the hidden relevance of our collections to our users and the community. So as far as the nitty-gritty behind-the-scenes details, I co-curated this exhibition with the University of Oregon's art librarian, and that took a period of 4 to 6 months. It involved developing a communication strategy with the University of Oregon's communications team that entailed buying ads in local news sources like the student newspaper and the local alternative news weekly, as well as producing a website that contextualized the exhibit along with common reading related art and literary events on campus. For this exhibition, we had to purchase a number of additional artist books to round out what we were showing, as well as catalog the new purchases, digitize them, and redigitize older artist books that weren't ideal for our use. We also have to create or improve metadata for the digital objects. As part of this exhibition, we organized an opening reception, and that included a screening of the archival materials. And those materials had to be sourced and set up by a University of Oregon archivist for the event. We designed a hashtag to capture audience interaction with the exhibit. But that hashtag wasn't successful. I would say it failed. And if I had to do it all over again, I would have fully rethought our digital engagement strategy. And I'll talk a little bit more about failures later on. So this program in particular aligned with the library's strategic mission and goals. And that's one of our specific goals, was to highlight collections and advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. We also uninstalled this exhibit and reinstalled it in a new space for additional viewing. The reinstallation took a full day. We were asked to keep the exhibit installed long enough for the Association of Academic Museums and Galleries conference attendees to view it, which just happened to be in Eugene, Oregon that year. Overall, we considered this exhibition a success, and it was highlighted in the library's donor publication. So if you have any specific questions about this program, just ask in the chat. Next,
actually, Tatiana, I already have 2 people who've typed in questions. One wants to know how many staff members were involved in the project, and another asked about whether or not you had grants to fund it.
So for curating this exhibition, it was really just two of us, 2 librarians. We did ask for some assistance from the archivist who was able to source the film and get it to us for the opening reception. And we also asked for help from the university's communications team. So some members of the university communications team were located in the library, and they were able to help us come up with a communication strategy, which includes social media outreach, as well as advertising, flyers, posters, and other types of print and digital advertising, low cost. As far as grants, we didn't receive a grant for this, but we did have a co-sponsor, which was the Oregon Humanities Center, who agreed to pay for some catering and some of the advertising for this exhibition's opening reception specifically, in exchange for promoting one of their programs. I hope that answered your question. Next, I want to discuss the Oppression and Resistance in Oregon program that we designed. So after the 2016 presidential election, the University of Oregon Special Collections and University Archives created a traveling exhibit centered on successful examples of political struggle in Oregon. This exhibit was created primarily with staff in mind and for ad hoc community gatherings held in the library in the days after the election. In response to campus publicity of the You Must Never Look Away from This exhibition that I co-curated and just discussed, I was invited by the University of Oregon Residence Life staff to present on violence against the Black body in Oregon history to new and returning resident advisors. I chose to repurpose this traveling exhibit on political struggle to illuminate untold stories of oppression and resistance in Oregon. The students were particularly fascinated by a range of materials that we had in the exhibition, some of which centered the National Japanese American Student Relocation Council records from World War II, and they were able to quickly draw parallels to issues that face colleges and universities today, as many declare themselves sanctuary campuses in light of the rhetoric against Muslims and undocumented students. Many of the students were surprised to learn of the case of Jacob Vanderpool in particular, who was one victim of Oregon's Black exclusion laws. These laws prevented Black people from residing in Oregon and were in place from the 1850s until 1927. Vanderpool was a successful African-American businessman in Oregon who was expelled by court order in 1851, and the UO Libraries holds the only existing records related to his case. Being resident advisors, the students were also drawn to the story of Maxine Maxwell, who unsuccessfully protested the university's discriminatory housing regulations against African Americans in the late 1920s. So, using library instruction as outreach to the specific campus community is important because the resident advisors can be considered first responders. They help students navigate and process their experiences at university. And learning about untold stories of oppression and resistance at the university and in Oregon provided students with both sobering historical context and evidence of successful social activism. We were then invited to present this at the University of Oregon's Portland campus for a staff development opportunity known as a Lunch and Learn, based on an internal staff blog post I wrote about my teaching experience with the RAs. Word of mouth from the Portland campus event led to another invitation to conduct this lecture at a Nurses Association conference. So some of the nitty-gritty details behind planning this, we were using original materials from special collections as well as some reproductions. So transporting and securing these materials and traveling with them, whether across campus or to another city, was an experience in itself. We had to definitely document this opportunity to talk about our collections, and that documentation included still photography. transporting these materials, it's a multi-hour endeavor, and transporting them to another city specifically was an all-day endeavor. And conducting this type of program really requires strong facilitation skills, as well as a second or third instructor to really help facilitate the conversation that students want to have about these materials and how it relates to their experiences and their knowledge of history. So if you have any questions about the specific case study that I'm mentioning, please feel free to leave it in the chat. Next, I want to discuss how might we design programs that illuminate. So in response to this idea, to this question, I created Archives Fest, which is a day-long celebration of special collections and archives at the University of Oregon, designed to better engage with the larger archives community and join in on the national advocacy conversation during Archives Month. And this was created in 2016. The event consisted of a special viewing of some of our most unique collections, ranging from rare books and medieval manuscripts to university athletics, memorabilia, and archival footage of university activism. Library staff also demoed basic book repair techniques and how to take care of personal AV materials and photos. During Archives Fest, we showcased our new visualization lab using specially formatted digital photograph collections, as well as our makerspace, which can be used to create 3D replicas of special collections artifacts. Archives Fest served to create a baseline for future public a baseline for future public programs in special collections and university archives. We were able to ask local museums, libraries, and archives to promote our event to their users. This allowed us to test our public reception, as well as try new marketing channels and program evaluation techniques internally. This program specifically allowed us to create new relationships with external partners, and we were able to collaborate with a local nonprofit, the Eugene Pioneer Cemetery Association, who agreed to host local history tours during the event, and a digital preservation vendor who agreed to come in and lecture on personal digital archiving. So as far as the nitty-gritty details, it took a core team of 5 volunteer librarians and archivists to plan Archives Fest over a period of 8 months. And this required faculty to volunteer to come in on a Saturday to showcase materials and give talks and advice during workshops. It required administrators to allow unionized staff to come in on a Saturday as part of their work week to teach. And it also required one of the archivists to source and digitize archival content on university activism and play old films on temperamental machinery as part of our screening during the event. Promoting this required a fairly involved communication strategy, which included ad buys in the local news alt weekly, the student newspaper, as well as a Facebook ad purchase. We partnered with a couple of different campus units. One was the University of Oregon Cinema Studies program, who agreed to co-sponsor catering for the event. Like I mentioned earlier, we had a vendor reach out and offer to give a digital preservation talk. He also sponsored a raffle and staffed a table. An event of this size required a lot of hand-holding the day of. We did a live promo via Facebook Live, and it also required corralling a large number of the attendees, so having volunteers on site who could help direct people from one event to the other during the day was important. As far as the event, we received good in-person and survey feedback, and we considered it a success. Our documentation included still photography. We created a dedicated lab guide and a store file to document. And we were also featured in the library's dinner publication. We had initially planned on a more elaborate day-long event, but we quickly realized that some of our goals were a little bit out of scope and we scaled back. For example, we were going to include home movie day programming, but decided to scale back. Another one of the obstacles that we kind of faced putting this together was resistance from staff who maybe were resistant to the idea of being able to put on a day-long event like this. If you have any questions about this specific event or about any of the details, please let me know via chat. So as we wait for comments, I'll move on to my next question. How might we design programs that connect people? So I want to talk about a collaboration that we worked on with the Urban League of Portland. We collaborated on a public release event for the 2015 State of Black Oregon report. This report was produced by the Urban League, and it detailed the net losses and gains of African Americans in Oregon as far as public health, education, employment, and other quality of life metrics, and how that changed since the release of their 2010 report 5 years prior. So specifically, the Urban League of Portland was looking for external partners outside of their traditional zones of Portland, which is the only urban area in the state, and Salem, which is the state capital. So they were looking for external partners who could help them spread the word about their data in rural areas and towns, increasing the impact of the report. This was especially important because African Americans constituted only 2% of the state population in 2015. The University of Oregon, being a college town in Central Oregon, was an obvious location. Having worked with the Urban League of Portland personally in the past, I proposed asking the University of Oregon libraries to partner. This involved getting buy-in from library administration, as well as proposing a co-sponsorship with the UO Public Policy Planning and Management Program on campus. It's also involved collaborating on a marketing plan with the University of Oregon's communications team. I consider the event to be a success because it brought together students, community leaders, and scholars into the library space for dialogue and learning. As far as the behind-the-scenes details, the event was agreed upon about 2 months prior to it being held. And I had offered to host, to collaborate on this event centered on the Urban League as part of work I had been doing for the organization voluntarily. So I had a personal connection to the organization, which helped facilitate the collaboration. At the time, the organization was going through a leadership transition. So a lot of the planning was up in the air until about 1 to 2 weeks before the event. We asked the campus unit, the PPPM program, the Public Policy Planning and Management Program, to co-sponsor event catering. And I asked the liaison to that specific program on campus to help collaborate and co-organize the event. The library provided space free of charge after jumping through a few hoops, one of which was our co-sponsorship policy, which at the time was fairly opaque and not easily accessible. I don't think it was even written down at the time. We also worked to produce talking points for our dean, who agreed to come in and host the event and speak. I mentioned before that we had an organizer, a co-sponsor sponsor the catering, the event catering, which is an interesting point because the Urban League actually refused to do the event unless catering was provided for attendees. And they considered that part of their ethos of caretaking, of working with the community, that any event should have food as a matter of course in order for people to attend and really participate. We worked with library staff and the communications team to produce a flyer, a web ad, as well as social media posts. And we documented the event through video recording and still photography and created a dedicated live guide that could host that documentation for future use. So anyone can go and see the event still on that live guide. The Urban League utilized their community network and email lists to encourage community members to participate. We had a really good turnout. They also activated their campus network to reach students at the library that we weren't tapped into, and brought in speakers from other academic communities, other universities and colleges, for example, to the University of Oregon campus as part of the event. After our library dean and the Urban League's director spoke, some of the organization staff led an icebreaker and facilitated the discussion of the report in different groups. Like I said, we consider the event a success, and so does the organization, which was very important to us. And we were both pleased with the turnout. If you have any questions about this specific event, please let me know in the chat. And I want to talk about a few things, specifically about collaborating with nonprofits that we learned through this program. And it's important to know at the start that engagement, whether with student groups or with outside organizations, you have to remember that the organizations will have their own goals, methods, constraints, and structures. So to that point, remember to center the user, the client, or the attendee, however they classify them. Remember that your schedule is not their schedule. Remember that many organizations often have a high turnover rate, so be prepared to deal with multiple people over time if you have a longer scale collaboration. And also, you have to have some comfort with ambiguity or with winging it if you're working with an external partner like a nonprofit organization. They might have different priorities or expectations as far as outcomes. Do you have anything in the chat? Martha?
I'm looking. We have several people who are talking about projects that they've done. Would you like me to read those at this time?
Sure.
Okay. One person said that they created a poetry cafe during the month of April. They used handmade flyers and word-of-mouth advertising, and they brought in outside contributors to provide the reading of poems. Adults and students did this along with having some musical entertainment with a jazz melody. So they did work with some outside people for that. The next person said they have a resources fair highlighting the library resources, and they brought in the vendors to explain those resources and to demonstrate their usefulness. And they said that was pretty well received, and they had a good many in attendance, and they had budgeted for refreshments. And then also, this is interesting, they used a local coffee company to offer coffee during that event. And then the last one that I see is somebody who had a program called Connecting People, 45 books in 45 minutes, and they brought in 9 volunteer reviewers, and each reviewed 5 books, 1 a minute per review, and they said this was really successful. And the community itself really organized the program, and they called it a book coffee house. And that's what I see.
So another engagement trend I'll mention is the movement towards more and official collaborations between academic libraries, museums, galleries, and archives, collectively known as GLAM institutions. These partnerships share and build on each institution's collection strengths and expertise to produce richer programming. For example, in 2016, Shakespeare's first folio came to the University of Oregon as part of a national tour, and it was displayed next door to our main library in our art museum. University of Oregon libraries contributed the second and fourth folio from our own special collections and worked with an English professor to curate a companion exhibit in the library. The University of Oregon also loaned some of our rare Qurans for a show at the Art Museum, at the Campus Art Museum, which enhanced their exhibition called American Quran by Sando Burke. Another example of collaboration is was a 2017 exhibition centered on the 500-year anniversary of the Reformation, which utilized our own relevant rare Bibles and a rare Bible special collection at a neighboring Christian university. This joint library exhibition included related programming featuring a local Reformation scholar, and this collaboration really allowed us to use our own collections to participate in an international theme, which museums and libraries around the world highlighted in 2017 as well. So my last question, which I'll ask now so that everyone can think about and we'll discuss further in session 2, is when is engagement meaningful?
This is Martha watching the chat. Let's see. Well, one person has already said it's meaningful when you're attempting to affect change. Let's see, somebody else, during the day, engagement can be meaningful with the elderly, early evenings for teens, and around bedtime for the younger ones having a bedtime story in the library. So they're thinking about that in terms of the timing of the program. Somebody else says meaningful engagement is when people show up, when they're excited about your project and willing to participate or help out. And I have one more here. This person says that engagement is meaningful when the patrons and the librarians are both enriched by the experience. That's what I see so far.
So, Anne, I'll leave it to you. I think we'll go more into this topic during session 2. When is engagement meaningful?
Okay, great. Thank you, Tatiana. So, we've concluded session 1 of Engagement Basics. We have our preview of topics to come in our session next week, where we look further into best practices, and Tatiana gives us more framework for assessing our programs and developing our programs. But in addition to our engagement basics, we do invite you to go to our corporate website and look at our other offerings for 2018. In February, we will begin a discussion. We're continuing our institutional competency section of our hot topics, and in February we'll be joined by innovative product manager for metadata, Nanette Knott, where she will begin the discussion with us on metadata basics. And then we have all of our listings through the summer of 2018 there, and you can sign up for both sections of the session there on our website. In addition to our hot topics, we also invite you to dig a little bit deeper into any of the topics that we present through our hot topics, and some that may not come through a hot topic presentation, and those would be our boot camps. Martha is actually going to do our first 2018 boot camp on cataloging essentials, things to be aware of if you are an accidental cataloger. In addition to that, we have other boot camps scheduled, and we are constantly adding to our boot camp schedule, which you can also find there on our corporate site. Again, on the corporate site where you go to register for the hot topics, you can see all of our offerings. You can register for both sessions of the hot topics in one place, and you will receive reminders of the hot topic presentations. And should you be unable to attend a hot topic, you will, by registering, you will automatically receive the recordings of these sessions, which will be posted on our YouTube channel. In addition to the information that you're going to receive that will link you to the recordings on the YouTube channel, you'll also receive a survey where we'd like to hear what you think about our sessions. We'd like for you to tell us what you would like to see in upcoming sessions. We are always in a planning mode, and we are open to suggestions and ideas. And then, most importantly, invite us into your library. Martha, myself, and any of the other library training consultants there at Innovative would love to consult with you on any of your pressing problems or provide additional information on any of the services or workflows or anything that is both beyond the ILS as well as related to the ILS. So we do thank you for your participation today, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. So have a good day, everyone.